'Cause you're listening to Jams and Tea on See the Show on your TV. So we talk about things musically. 'Cause you're listening to Jams and Tea. Listening to Jams and Tea.
We are going to do our recommended album as separate episodes, and this is the first time that we're doing this. So this is immediately after we just did our episode on the new Liam Havis and Haken. But today, why don't we let Saoirse introduce the record we're going to be discussing.
I noticed how you put a break between the words dis and discussing.
Dick sucking.
Wow. Anyway, but before we start, I want to make a correction to what I said about this record last week. Last week I said that the movie Frank was based on this artist. It's not. Based on a completely different artist called Frank Sidebottom, who is actually very influenced by Captain Beefheart, but different real-life influence. Anyway, Trout Mask Replica, the third album by Captain Beefheart and his Magic Band. This came out in 1969. It is currently regarded as the classic amongst the Captain Beefheart back catalogue. It has 10-star reviews in Q, Pitchfork, All Music. It has been called influential both by and about artists like John Frusciante of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, John Lydon of the Sex Pistols, and also The Clash, Tom Waits, PJ Harvey,
David Byrne, David Lynch.
Yeah, it's David Lynch's favorite album, which is going to surprise no one. Is very influential for its use of breaking all of the rules you have heard of in music. I would describe this record somewhat as like almost like Godard's Breathless in a way, where it's like we're breaking a load of the rules so that people, and even if it doesn't hold up super well, people in the future can look at some of the rules we broke and take what they want from that into their own artwork.
That's a very like historically very nice comparison. In terms of experientially, I would compare it more to Godard's Weekend, or one of his more kind of like aggressively difficult films. But
I mean, I would not compare it to the Godard works that are sort of as abstract as this record, because I find those incredibly boring, and I would never call this record boring. Where do I start? Well, Captain Beefheart are famously
in terms of experience, I would compare this to Salo or the 120 Days of Sodom.
It is clearly.
I'm going to double down on that comparison. Don't you worry.
Oh,
I'll develop it later.
It's clearly more indebted to Pasolini's other films that had not yet been released when this came out. One thing I want to say, just as an additional bit of context, is that I haven't heard a lot of Beefheart records, but my understanding is this is actually somewhat of an outlier in the band's catalogue, in that much of their other music is more blues rock. Well, this is obviously blues rock and did it as well, but much of their other music is more kind of conventional in approach, still off the wall and weird in its own Beefhearty way, but nothing else in his catalogue approaches sound in the same way as this does.
Absolutely.
You could have stopped at saying nothing in the catalog approaches sound.
Well, that's not true.
I don't think that's
true,
fair.
because my point
Like,
is
Safe
that
as
there's a
Milk
lot
is
of
a
more
very
conventional
musical
sounding
record.
music than this in Beefheart's.
I just want to take a cheap shot. Let me have this.
Like, I mean, if nothing else, this is like the antithesis of silence.
The antithesis of silence. What a fucking title.
Yeah. In preparation for this, I listened to their debut record, Safe as Milk, which is more normal, but I don't like as much.
The antithesis of silence, sorry to interrupt again, the antithesis of silence needs to be like the next Full of Hell album title or something, or like Nails or something, like a Power of Violence record needs to be called that. Anyway, continue.
No, it's fine. I hadn't listened to this record when I listed it as my record to recommend this week. because at that point I just wanted to choose an album that would be interesting. Of course I knew about it and why it was interesting, but I had no idea what to expect going into this record. It is 78 minutes long, and almost every song can't be recognized as a conventional song. There are a couple like The Closer that are much more like what one would expect, but I can't really describe what this record is like, but I really liked it. And in a way that it made going to Safe as Milk more difficult because it's more normal. And part of what I really liked about this record was just I got completely lost in it. In every arrhythmical choice it made, in every tempo key change, every strange drum beat that's out of step, every polyrhythm, every strange bass line, every strange abstract line of poetry. And I really love the poetry that's in the lyrics here. Like, because I think the lyrics are really emblematic of the record, actually, where it's going to be like Marmite, where you either love it and you get completely lost in the complexity of it, or you just say, no, I can't get on board with this. That's totally valid. But that wasn't me. I really enjoyed this record. I think that, and I'm conflicted about aspects of it because I think it's a bit long to maintain that level of fascination in that way. But I feel like if you were to cut any of it down, it wouldn't be what it is. It just, in a way, I'm in a Tyler-esque camp here where part of me loves it conceptually.
It won't surprise you to hear that I feel very similarly to you about this album.
Right, okay, that's fair enough. I love just every little intellectually stimulating note in it. I'm not going to give it a 10 because I think it's a record you listen to once and then you wait 5 years and you listen to it again. And I listened to it like 3 times in preparation for this episode. But I enjoyed it very much and I can't wait to hear all of you dunk on it.
I love that silence. I probably won't go next just because it would be nice to break up to relatively agreeing reviews. So I'm going to nominate that either Jake or Morgan go next.
Let me go next just because Morgan is undoubtedly going to be better than me. But I would like to preface, I originally was not going to attend this episode of the podcast because I've had a shitty week and I feel like shit. But I decided against it. And I gave Morgan 3 write-ups for each album, about a paragraph long, just to detail my thoughts with scores, just in case I didn't make it. This is what I wrote for Captain Beefheart's Trout Mask Replica. Whoever recommended this, parenthetical, I can't immediately recall who it was, go fuck yourself. I hope someone coats their finger in lemon juice and pokes you in the eye. This gave me a headache at work twice. I can engage with abrasive and obtuse music of all varieties, but this is me at my fucking limit. Credit where it's due, you gotta love the sheer almost punk rock levels of dedication to not adhering to the rules, but just because you break the rules doesn't mean you make something worth my very precious time on this earth listening to. Listening to pretty much anything else that cites this as an inspiration instead, something like Frank Zappa, King Crimson, fucking anything is far better use of your time. And the best summary of my thoughts other than that is as follows.
Oh, please be careful. I thought you were going to make that whole bottle.
Oh, Lord.
This album, look, in past episodes where I talk about things like the artwork or Faber Abraham, I met that shit halfway. I engaged with it on a conceptual level. I was able to put aside some of my more instinctual musical and human biases. I couldn't do it, man. Not this time. Not this album. Look, maybe it just caught me at the wrong time, but I was expecting something weird. Like, as I told Morgan earlier today, I have been plowing through the catalog of Tom Waits, a man who has cited Captain Beefheart as a point of reference from him, who generally makes very weird and kind of abrasive and strange music. And most of my favorite albums of his are the weirder and more abrasive ones. So you'd think that I'd have an inclination to maybe digging what this album puts down. And instead, I was greeted to an assault of noise. I feel like every bit of instrumentation on this album was recorded separately, like on different continents. And then it was all meshed together in the studio, and they were just like, these don't really sync up all that well. And they said, yeah, you're right. So anyway,
Jake.
And it's just...
The interesting thing is that every single thing was intended.
Yeah, I have to elaborate on that. Is that these pieces were all the instrumentation, the vocals were recorded separately, but all the instrumentation was recorded at the same time and rehearsed for months. So it's very, very deliberate, which is not to say therefore it's good, but it's an important detail to recognize when you're talking about the sound.
It's an important detail for my segment.
It's impressive to a point. And that point being, I guess the best thing I can say about this album is that it definitely does a great job at making you feel like it's pure chaos. Even if it is all orchestrated, it certainly doesn't sound that way. But as is, I went to a Radiohead concert in Cincinnati with Morgan, generally one of the best events of my life. And the opening 15, 20 minutes of Radiohead on the stage was them tuning their instruments. It was a vastly more pleasant experience than this.
Well,
and I can tell you...
That's inaccurate. It was that was an opening group fronted by Johnny Greenwood that was sort of influenced by world music and stuff like that. It was just more international based. I thought it was boring as shit. I would listen to it 1,000 times before I listened to this again.
No, I mean, there's only so much I can say about an album that I can only describe as sounds happening. And sure, there is the vocal component and the lyrical, I struggle to say content. And again, like to think I have a tolerance for this because one of my favorite bands is the Mars Volta. And again, Tom Waits, not a stranger to throwing out a bunch of nonsense in their lyrics. Here, on the other hand, I'm just like, this is not evoking anything in me. I'm just listening to this obnoxious bullshit.
What really saves, not saves, because I admire quite a bit of the writing here, and I'll explain why. But one aspect I really like is that there is a very real sense of self-awareness on this record of the absurdity. There are regular kind of non sequiturs, like that one. There's one interlude, spoken word interlude passage on the first Here Pie, I think, where it's where Captain Beefheart is explaining to what sounds like a couple of really drugged out hippies what they're recording. And he's like, how does it sound? He's like, how does it sound? And they're like, yeah, it sounds great, man. And he's like, this is a field recording. like he's kind of because they're just recording nothing. They're recording found sound at that particular point. And so he's kind of poking fun at this notion that people will say that anything sounds good because they're in the presence of a musician. And also in the same interlude as well, he says we're recording this one song, and then he's like, actually no, this is a different song. I can't remember what he says specifically, but I
think it's Neon Octafish.
Yeah, he says they're recording Neon Meat Dream, and then he's like, no, actually no, this is Here Pie. And it seems like a really kind of self-aware dig at the fact that all of this music, on a cursory glance, does seem to blend together in a really kind of in a way, because it's so unconventional and so bizarre and so noisy and so absurd, that it does have this kind of blurring together effect when you're not used to it, when you're still calibrating it. But I like the sense of self-awareness that, and like the studio chatter that's inserted throughout the record, including like the sounds of laughter as well, and like I just
Fast
think,
and bulbous.
yeah,
Austin
I love that
Bulbous.
so much.
yeah,
And
but
they're
like
just riffing on
specifically
that
the
line
moment
from
in
the
that where I think it's Beefheart is like starts laughing, like Jesus Christ, like even he is like aware of how ridiculous what is going on is, or maybe it's not him that says that, but like there's just so much levity and moments of genuine like amusing self-awareness scattered all throughout this, that I think lend an extra layer to it. Like it doesn't feel like someone who is like just pretentiously trying to like create the most unmusical thing possible. It feels like
Okay,
I'll get more into it
agree
in
to
my
disagree on that point, because
like
the
there is
difference between something like, go ahead.
I was gonna say there is a cohesive and coherent concept here, and like there is a sweep to it, even if I do have some reservations about the length as well that I'll get into. Like I do think that, like, and I hate to say this, but I do think that it's one of those things where the more time you spend with it, not necessarily the more time you spend listening to it, but the more time you have it in your life, the more your relationship to it changes, I think, and evolves. And it has for me anyway, and I get that this is, and I get from the reading that I've done that this seems to be a common thing for a lot of people, is that it obviously is so obtuse and directly offensive the first time you listen to it, but it's just really hard to explain. Like the more the more you know this record and the more time you spend with it, the more it kind of becomes a part of you in a weird way.
I would just like to chime in on what you're saying, because this was like, I was aware of it, of course, but this was my first time listening to it in full. And I had a really great time because it was just a really new experience that I can engage with and just have a crack at processing, I suppose.
Yeah, but like, and then it's obviously like awesome, because not very many people have that kind of initial experience with a record. But like this album, I've heard this album for the first time when I was like 15, and I hated it. But this has become like a in my DNA now. Like, and I hate that, but it is. Like it's become a part of me, and it's kind of filtered through a lot of my experiences with tracking the evolution of rock music. And I just not only get and admire what the record is trying to do, but I actively enjoy it more the older I get. And I don't know why that is, but it just is. And I've got lots of details about what I like about it and why I value it and what I think are some of the weaknesses of it. And I'll get into that when it's actually my turn proper. But yeah, this is kind of an extended diversion. But yeah, I do think that it's important to acknowledge that there is real purpose here and real concept, and there's a real vision for this album, and that the more you dig into it and the more time you kind of spend with it, I think the easier it is to see that. And we do this a lot because we often discuss records that we've just heard, or we've just heard a few times, or we haven't had them in our life for a long time. And I do think that there are particular albums where, and this is by no means the only one, where your relationship with it and your experience of it and your comprehension of it change, not necessarily through more listening, although that does help, but simply through knowing it for a long time. And that's a limitation of what we do in this podcast. It's not a big deal because it's not something that comes up a lot, but it is something that I think is particularly pertinent to discussing how we feel about this album. Yeah. And it's not at all to invalidate anyone who hates it at all. And I want to be clear about that. But it is something that is really crucial to my experience with the record.
Yeah, like I would never say I think the intention here is to create something totally a musical, and that's the only intention. Like, of course, that's there, but I think it's less like a troll record where they're just like, let's make this record to like piss people off by being a musical. It's more just like, this is an area I want to explore.
Yeah, but it's not even that it's a musical, because it's constantly musical. It's just doing it in a way that the brain doesn't process. Every passage is in itself musical, but they're jammed together and they're glued together in a way that doesn't cohere. In terms of traditional music standards,
that's a much better way of phrasing
instruments that are playing rhythms that are coherent rhythms. That if you took this track, the instrumental track out for each individual instrument and listen to each thing individually, it would sound musical, but they're not glued together in a way in which they complement each other. They're glued together in a way in which they are conflicting with each other in a very direct way. And
of course, like that's of course what I was trying to get at. I just wanted a way to say that in like a word, I suppose.
Whereas like noise music in comparison is like just making noises, basically. Like the whole band.
Is that not all music? Just making
no, but
noises.
like music. You get albums like on the final track of Spiritualized's album, Ladies and Gentlemen, We're Floating in Space. There's that's a 17-minute closer, and there's an extended stretch in that closer where it's just like this whole orchestra going absolutely ham, like making all the noise they possibly can, and it just sounds like a wall of sound. And it's very, very different to you might talk about it in the same language as you would talk about something here, but it's very, very different in terms of construction and effect and intention to what's being done here, which is logical, coherent musical statements that are presented in an illogical, uncoherent, and conflicting way.
No, you're absolutely right, but but what I meant was like, it's not just trying to be a musical, it is pushing at an idea.
Sure.
It's not like a troll record. There's something they are trying to not do, but like investigate more than anything else. Like I am under no illusions that people thought this was like the ultimate statement in the direction they're pushing this album in. It was just like, whoever made the decision, this body wants to have a go, and that spirit of just, what if we did this? Isn't that interesting? Is imbued throughout the record, and that's, I think, really why I gravitate to it.
Yeah, the comparison point I want to bring up as well is like I had this in my review, but I'm just going to bring it up now because I think it's relevant. Is there's not like no precedent for what Beefheart is doing here, because like you can see some of the roots of this in like the first couple of Velvet Underground records, for example, which tease and experiment and toy with this kind of like rejection of like conventional musical structure in terms of the playing and the layering of the instruments, but they kind of always anchor it with something familiar, or it's always kind of a diversion or a discursion more than like the focal point of a record. So this is kind of like this is kind of like Beefheart is saying, okay, so what if we did that, but we did nothing but that, and we did it for 80 minutes? Like it is pushing at the limits of human comprehension and of what people can stand. And it is like, I've talked about a lot about how I dislike the word experimental in musical discourse, because it's often used in ways which are basically meaningless to describe music that there are actually plenty of descriptors for, and is actually not very experimental at all, because using that word often, I think, devalues the intention and effort of the musicians. But I think this is a perfect record to describe as experimental, because even though there is a clear intention here, the intention is to experiment, is to do things that had not been done in this particular form and way before, to see what happens, basically.
Right. I think we should let Jake get back to his point.
Yeah, sorry. That was really
y'all
off.
done.
No, I was including myself in that. Don't feel victimized.
No, I was apologizing to Jake. Yeah,
I'm sorry,
I went on
Jake.
for way too long.
Look, all I'm saying is you're both right, and that's all well and good. But what separates something like this from my thoughts on My Teenage Dream Ended or the artwork is that there's an authenticity and an emotional honesty that goes into those records that I believe came from a personal place that, no matter how misguided, was a result of a feeling. And the notion of just doing this to break rules and just do this, even if it is all planned out, and if they are going for things and have these musical ideas, is that I find this word, like the word experimental, to often be overused and poorly used as a descriptor. But I find it to be fucking pretentious, because I don't know how else I meant to describe this when it's just supposed to be defined by what it isn't. And then when you listen to it, it's just like, wow, I can appreciate all of the things that this inspired, but I can't appreciate this on any conceivable level, because listening to it is viscerally repugnant, and in a way that is not building or structured in a way that feels like it has a point. It's structured in a way that's meant to, like, it's just fuck you. It doesn't care. This album doesn't give a shit about you. It doesn't give a shit about the people who made it. It does not forgive. It does not forget. And it absolutely will not stop until you are dead, in a way that is not at all complimenting of masochism in any way, shape, or form. It literally just wants to fucking kill you, because that musical intention, when I listen to this album, I don't feel like a conflicted soul who decided to make this album because he was tired of the mundanity of the musical industry and wanted to break all the rules. I just hear a bunch of bullshit, and I know how stupid that sounds. I sound like a fucking Neanderthal following up Saoirse and Tyler talking about how this is a tightly planned musical experience that's meant to facilitate this chaotic listen and have all these ideas and to experiment for the sake of it. And I sound like a fucking moron who's just drank a half a bottle of wine, but I can tell you that if I was sober, I'd probably be more coherent and saying that this album drives me fucking crazy. Listening to it gives me a headache, and that's fine sometimes. I listen to Songs for the Deaf, an album I love to bits, and that shit gives me a headache because Josh Homme just said, hey man, what if we took this shit up to 11 and made this shit real loud? And it's not because this is loud, it's because this is chaotic, it's messy, it is not necessarily a musical as it is, like, it is antithetical to art. It is Dada-esque. It is the embodiment of that entire philosophy, and that it is just there. And as such, I will evaluate it on its own terms, and those own terms are that this fucking thing sucks, and I hate it. And I can't imagine myself being different. I am a fluid being with different opinions that evolve over the space of time. That being said, I tend to stick by my opinions, and I really can't say, being 5 years down the line, if I was 27 and revisiting this and just being like, I don't know what kind of horrible, tragic bullshit would have to happen to me in those 5 years for me to say, yeah, man, Trout Mask Replica, I fuck with that shit. But if something happens to me in this time period that is that bad, I want all of you, each member of this podcast, to fly to Kentucky, and I want you to ritualistically sacrifice me to some kind of musical deity that erases this from existence and leaves only the things that inspired it. Therefore, we can keep the good and destroy the evil and say that it is defeated.
That's Cabin in the Woods reference.
Hallelujah. Holy shit. Where's the Tylenol?
That was beautiful, and it's a very valid perspective.
It was so nice, and I know for a fact, because Jake sent me his blurb on this with a rating, that I hate it more.
Well, hang on. Let's break this up. Let's, I think, go August, then Morgan.
Okay.
I don't know if August going to like this
likely
more.
to give the album a 10.
Yeah, August might loathe it, but let's see.
I said there was a comparison I was going to double down on.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll get to that. 1 second.
He's leaving
Be a
us to
visual
talk about
aid.
this dog shit piece of garbage.
Okay. I said I was going to double down on comparing this to the film Sallow or the 120 Days of Sodom. And I fully believe there's a comparison to be made between this album and this
There's
film.
a lot of shit.
I want to know, August,
Both.
what your parents said when
Deeper than that.
Blu-ray showed up in the mail.
Oh no! I went to a store and purchased this myself.
Oh right, no.
The lady who rung me up had no clue what it was, and her life is all the better for it.
That's fair.
But anyways,
Yeah.
What I am going to say as to the similarity of those two works of art is that on a surface level, I feel in the general cultural consensus, while Beefheart's record is certainly viewed in much higher regard than 120 Days. What I find as the through line between these two works is that these are both things that are going for something that is that is like a very genuine expression. But what I feel turns a lot of people off from these two works is that within them there is a lot of like intentional fuckery and like trollery meant to kind of dissuade a lot of people. And I know you've made the point that the Beefheart record is not a troll record, which I would agree with. It is a very genuine statement, but there are certainly parts of it that I feel are intended to kind of troll, manipulate, and mess with the listener, just to kind of throw you off, as there are in Sallow with like the interludes where you just have a lady describing some weird, vulgar story or whatever. But that is my primary point of comparison, of similarity, that I think these are genuine statements. These are statements that are making a true point that you have to look for it, is my main thesis, that it is not some...
I would like to refute your comparison. Not refute it, because I think your point is fair, but I think there are more ways in which...
The whole bottle's gone.
I think there
I did
are
notice,
more ways
Jake.
in which Sallow and Trout Mask Replica are conflicting works of art, or at least works of art that are going for very different things than there are comparisons. Like, for example, I think that Sallow is a film that utilizes conventionally beautiful and opulent settings and filmmaking techniques in the service of depicting evil. Whereas this is a record that is just deliberately unpleasant in presentation and refuting anything. There's no, like, it's not dressed up nicely. It's not formally composed in a way which is like utilizing a lot of established or conventional techniques. It's just like in complete opposition to everything for the purpose of like creativity versus Sallow's purpose of destruction or interest in destruction. I could be here all day doing this, and I'm going to stop right there because I don't.
I will not. Thing is, I will not even entirely disagree with that point, because my comparison is truly only on that level of a genuine effort with parts that are meant to dissuade people.
Yeah.
But I do think you make a fair point there.
Yeah.
That it is not a 1-to-1 comparison. But what I find so entrancing about this album is that I've had it in my life since about I was 14 or so, and for the longest time I used to I had not listened to the full album. I had listened to like 5 or 6 songs off it, just like stuff like Frownland, and really all of these songs that are more immediate in terms of their like engagement and yet also kind of subversion in a sense. if that means anything. But I was familiar with that part of the album, and what I've come to.
I feel like if you, like, your mind is made up on how you feel about those songs within the first 30 seconds of hearing them.
Dark Owl
Oh,
Blues,
no, you're right.
Those pole dues, Dark
Can't
Owl
go
Blues.
back to your frown land.
Oh, and I mean, so many parts of this are just bad. They are bad, but yet I find the whole fascinating.
Yeah, it's
I was peeing, so I couldn't tell who, but somebody had a really good Tom Waits impersonation with their voice.
I think that was me, but I was doing a Captain Beefheart impersonation.
Good job, Saoirse. You've done
Yeah, I mean, no one did a Tom Waits.
No,
Nice
but
try, buddy.
you make a really good point, August, in the sense that this is a record that you really kind of like. It's very different if you evaluate it holistically to if you break it down on a track-by-track basis, which I'm not going to do. I'm going to evaluate it holistically. But I guess it depends on your approach to music as well. That will have an effect on whether you're one of those people that feels that every constituent part has to be brilliant for a record to be great, or whether the holistic cumulative effect of a work of art is like the primary the thing of primary importance.
Good thing it's bad on both levels, so it makes that pretty fucking easy.
I mean, I would say that what makes it fascinating is, for me, on a track-by-track level, just what is happening on an individual track, what is kind of being parodied or just made fun of, or even kind of, I would not know the word, but kind of maybe reconstructed almost. There's elements of like beat poetry across this.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Where it's just reading off a poem completely without any instrumental backing. It's almost like an interlude, except it is a focal point here.
Coincidentally, that's also something that Tom Waits does on Swordfish Trombones, which I also happen to have listened to this week.
He does that on a number of records, where he just kind of has these spoken word segments and stories, and it's quite pleasant because it builds a vibe and it does a lot of cool stuff, whereas on here it makes me want to kill myself.
No, but that's what I love. I love that this builds a vibe. Because I think there's a great vibe.
August said, I love when it makes me want to kill myself.
No, not. But I don't think you're on a like entirely wrong track, because what I find when I dissect this album lyrically is that it's very dark. It's not a happy album. It is. There are lots of songs about the Great Depression, hard living.
The Vietnam War especially is all over this record.
War, yeah. It is a record that
good for. Absolutely.
But yeah, it is a record you can take on
the amount of nice things you have to say about the record. Absolutely nothing.
No.
Yep, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, look, Jake's had his moment, all right?
Shut up, Jake.
I'm listening to August now.
So it is a record you can take on a surface level and just be like, this sounds bad, I hate it. But you can also take it on a level of, well, this sounds weird, but this weirdness is reflective of the vocal tone on here. This album is going for something depressing, off-putting, and the instrumental backings completely out of sync, wonky. They're just completely off-putting. It is, to me, like a really brilliant harmony on this record that I feel goes a bit underappreciated. And maybe I'm being big dumb autistic brain for like appreciating that about this album, but I just genuinely find it so captivating that it pulls me through the 75 some minutes of this album, even if I don't think it's a consistently great or interesting record. On the songs that I don't really like what is it called? I shall look.
All of them. Every song.
Oh, I will
Bill's
say
Corpse.
I will say one song I don't care for, like even in terms of what it's going for, is China Pig, which I think is just dull.
God, it sucks so bad.
But
I found that
so bad.
Let's see. Ant-Man B.
I like that song.
No,
I
I do too. I don't particularly care for the first half. But then there's that second half where Captain Beefheart is playing like two woodwind instruments at once. And it's the goofiest, craziest idea. And it just kind of saves that whole first half for me. And it was at that moment in listening to this record, I realized kind of exactly why I liked it, because it reminded me of all the stupid, weird musical experiments I would do when I was like younger and made really amateurish, like bad music. Because it reminded me of all like the stupid ideas I would have to like try and differentiate myself, like playing slap guitar or like pitching down the last two strings on a guitar to like emulate the sound of a bass. It reminded me of that kind of stupid, weird, off-the-cuff experimentation, and I feel like I was able to absolutely just get in the head of Beefheart on this album.
This is a canonically classic record, and it's so not even funny how you've made actual albums that are just so much better than this. Just so much better.
But yeah, that's about all I have to say about Trout Mask Replica. Very interesting, not always great, but when it is just, I can't help but love it.
Go on, Morgan. I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah.
Yell at
King.
it.
Go off, King.
Well, I don't know. I don't know how much yelling I'm gonna do. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to top
I'll do it
Jake's
for you.
rant. Yeah, exactly. You already have. I think the discourse around this record, as well as the story behind it, is, as many people have said, absolutely fascinating. Beefheart is always talked about as like one of the like absolute genuine eccentrics in the history of rock music. There's this sort of like, he's like almost like a cult like figure in a way for some music fans. He's an unparalleled genius to many people, and this is his magnum opus and all that. So it's certainly interesting to go into this record with those sort of expectations, you know. It's also interesting to me that the thing I heard most often about it before listening to it was that it's a love it or hate it kind of album. And I find that interesting because the only thing I had heard that wasn't positive about this album was Fantano's review. First of all, he was more mixed, decidedly, but everything else I had seen was showering uniform praise, which is just one of the many reasons that while listening to this, I had a bit of a crisis. I thought I was going insane. It felt like someone was playing a really unkind joke on me. Like the entirety of the music world was like, hey, this album is one of the most influential of all time, and it's so important, and it's one of the greatest albums ever. And I turn it on, and it's, separate fucking guitar lines all playing their own different thing, and the drums are doing some weird polyrhythm, and it has this dude with Tom Waits' voice going raisins, and it's like is this the world's most elaborate joke? Have I been punked this hard?
Let's fuck over Morgan.
Well, it's
said
funny
everyone.
you should say that, because no, it's not.
Yeah, which and I had to confront the fact that it was not a joke, because if it was, I could laugh. I could get in on it. But no, this is a thing that people love. And look, no judgment if you love it. Seriously. I really don't care one way or another. On a purely musical level, this is maybe the worst album I've ever heard in my life. There are albums that I hate more, but I don't like, from a conceptual artistic merit level. There are certainly albums that I hate more. This probably wouldn't even make it on like a top 50 least favorite albums list. But I can't think of a single album that I hated listening to more than this. This is weird, but I would not say that I have perfect pitch. I don't know how to test that. But I have always had a really good ear. Like, around instruments, I can immediately tell if they're out of tune, and an out of tune instrument, particularly if it's out of tune with itself, like parts of it are in tune and the other parts aren't, drive me absolutely batshit insane. It's a weird, visceral, completely primal response.
I can attest to this. Morgan is so picky when he tunes his guitars. It's like freaky. He's not exaggerating.
And but this also extends to a sort of the way I feel about rhythm. I'm always more attracted to music that has an inherent rhythm and beat that I can sort of immediately gel with. That's not to say that excludes me from liking, anything that doesn't adhere to conventional rhythms or anything. But like, I've always said that bad music is something that like viscerally offends me. And like I just before this podcast started, I just didn't listen to bad music all that much, because I mean, like, it was an active weight on my mental well-being to do so. So this is the podcast has actually kind of walked me back on some of this stuff, especially with it being, something that we're doing and has the potential to do very well. These are things I've been able to dial back and restrain a little bit for the sake of the show itself. Evidenced by the fact that I got through this album in the first place, because I did listen to the whole thing, by God. All 120 minutes. Not 120, 80 minutes.
It feels like 120 men.
Yeah. To that end, this is just so deeply abrasive and actively irritating. I don't know if it was meant to be irritating. I don't much care, because it really is. If I find one of the most interesting things about the story behind this to be the fact that well, I'll just read from the page I have pulled up here. This is from the Wikipedia page, but everything on here has been confirmed by interviews with the band members. So I'll just read off here. In preparation, the band rehearsed Van Vliet's, that's Beefheart if you don't know, difficult compositions for 8 months, living communally in a small rented house in Los Angeles. Van Vliet implemented his vision by asserting complete artistic and emotional domination over his musicians. At various times, one or another of the band members were put, quotes, in the barrel, with Van Vliet berating him continually, sometimes for days, until the musician collapsed in tears or in total submission to Van Vliet. According to John French and Bill Harkleroad, who are two personnel members on this, these sessions often included physical violence. French described the situation as cult-like, and a visiting friend said that the environment in that house was positively Manson-esque. Their material circumstances were also dire. With no income other than welfare and contributions from relatives, the band survived on a bare subsistence diet. French recounted on living on no more than small cups of soybeans a day for a month, or a small cup of soybeans a day for a month. And at one point, band members were arrested for shoplifting food, with Zappa bailing them out. A visitor described their appearance as cadaverous and said that they all looked in poor health. Band members were restricted from leaving the house and practiced for 14 or more hours a day. Van Vliet once told John French that he had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and he would see non-existent conspiracies that explained this behavior. So this is something that I would rarely see brought up in the discussion of the genius of Captain Beefheart and his magic band. And funnily enough, it made my feelings on this album a lot easier to reckon with. Because initially I was like, look, I hate this more than most things. But like, I can acknowledge the influence that it's had on popular music since its release. So this does leave me in a strange position of not completely getting across my own feelings on the album, but like without sort of like if I was a completely 100% emotionally honest with no critical background or thought, this would be the worst thing ever. And instead, I have to introduce that critical thought. So I did that by contextualizing. And really what I came to is that, sure, this record may be super influential, but it was also masterminded by an abusive shit sack of a human being who made, in this instance, the worst music I've ever heard and forced these people to make said music, it seems. He also went on to take complete credit for composition and arranging, which is something that the band members strongly disputed in the years afterwards. Yeah. So essentially the conclusion that I come to is that I can appreciate the influence this has had while also thinking it is a massive pile of bullshit that offends every single one of my sensibilities in one way or another. I hated listening to it. It made me hate Don Van Vliet before I even read all the stuff about what he did to his band members. And I loathe every aspect of this record. And I can appreciate its influence. I can also just listen to the thing it's influenced and like those things and move on with my life. The story surrounding it is fascinating, but listening to it is almost like an act of self-harm. It's viscerally so deeply unpleasant for me personally on any level that I can think of, and I despise it. There's not a single moment of it that I enjoy. It has no redeeming factors. And
well said.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
and I do not. once again, I do not mean to disparage anyone
No,
that has.
I didn't take it as a disparaging, Morgan.
No,
that was
absolutely.
very,
I just
very
want to
well
say
said.
that if me recommending this record did affect your mental health in any way, I am so deeply sorry.
It didn't, because I think one way or another I was going to listen to this album at some point in time, and it's making for a great discussion and a great evening that I'm having here with you. So any effects that I had as a result of listening to it are then remedied by this subsequent discussion. So don't worry about that at all.
Okay.
If anything, I'm going to dig up Don Van Vliet's corpse and shit on him. I blame him and not you.
Okay.
Wow.
Very good rants and raves we're getting. Okay,
Absolutely.
so all right.
Have you seen Sallow?
Point of
No, I'm sure I would enjoy it more though.
a point I want to raise here as well about like liking of this record and what that like means. I don't want there to be a misunderstanding here that when I say I like this record, that means that I listen to it and I find it pleasant. It's not a pleasant record to listen to. It is noisy. It is unpleasant, to pick an easy word. It's visceral, and it's in a lot of ways it is offensive on the ears. And I don't see the fact that it is all of these things as inherently valuable. And I don't trust anyone who listens to it and says it sounds bad, therefore it's good. Like, you have to unpack things like this, whether you're trying to argue for them or against them in more detail than that. And so I'm going to try to do that. So a quote I picked up from Beefheart about his intention with this record is that, quote, it is trying to break up the mind in many different directions to cause people to be unable to fixate. And I think that if that is the goal, it is admirably achieved. This is a record that refuses to let you pin it down at all turns. It is even a record that cheekily, in moments, will strike through with something vaguely comprehensible and then will rip it away from you as an act of belligerent teasing. Immediately on Frownland, you're greeted with the disorienting arrangement of instrumental tracks that are tight but completely clash with each other. Harmony is disregarded, and when it occurs, is entirely incidental. Beefheart's lyricism is surreal and seemingly more about evoking a feeling of formless chaos than translating any real meaning. It is very surreal, and I don't think that... I think Jake brought up the comparison of this to Dada as a movement or as an idea, and I think that's really not far off base with what Beefheart's going for with the writing here. He never really sings in a way that approaches conventional goodness, although, I mean, in fairness, there were plenty of rock frontmen at the time who weren't that great vocally. But I do think that what Beefheart does have is an incredible vocal range. It seems as though on nearly every track he adopts a slightly new voice or variation on his voice with every song, which gives it a kind of disorienting feel of like a compilation of different mad, raving lunatics. And it's all really, for the most part, this one guy. There are other vocalists on the record, I'm aware, but the majority of the vocals are handled by Don Van Vliet. So there's a lot about this record that is confrontational in a way it's just not friendly. It's not fun, really. Like, it has a playful aspects to it, but I agree that the listening process to this record is not fun. So I guess the extent to which you're able to make a value judgment on the merit of the record, and this is obviously setting aside the contextual stuff that Morgan rightly raised about how the record was created. But I think in order to make a value judgment, it will just, for you personally, it will depend on whether you see merit in things that are unpleasant experiences artistically, and some people, fairly enough, do not, and that's, I guess a difference is that I can listen to this and not enjoy the sound of it, but like the experience for what it signifies and for what it makes me think about and for the effect that it has on me. And I want to impress as well. I've already said this, but I want to impress further that this is not was not the way that I felt the first time I heard the record. The first time I heard the record, I loathed it. I loathed it with every core of my being. And I think more than anything, I just thought that I don't get this. I feel like there's a joke here or some aspect of it that I'm not getting. And I'm not trying to suggest that your perspectives will necessarily change with time like mine did. I'm really not trying to suggest that, nor am I trying to will that into existence. I frankly don't care enough about this record to really give a shit whether it grows on you or not. But I do want to say that the, like I said earlier, the passage of time for this record and the fact that I heard it early in my musical education and now coming back to it after years and years and years of listening to music, I have an appreciation for not just for the influence, but for what it represents in and of itself and for the experience that it is. An interesting thought exercise, I think, is to consider free jazz music. Which, since Ornette Coleman stormed onto the scene a decade earlier than this record, had gradually risen to popularity in certain jazz scenes and would go on past this album to have a long and fruitful life in experimental music and in sort of more alternative forms of rock music as a legitimate form of expression. There are definitely examples of free jazz playing all over this album in the brass instrumentation, and it deliberately eschews conventional rhythm to evoke, again, that sense of chaos, which is what free jazz does. And the difference with Trout Mask Replica is that what it essentially does is have all the musicians doing this. Free rock, if you will. I guess it's up to the individual to make a value judgment as to how that sounds to them. Plenty of people do enjoy free jazz. And when we discuss, as I believe we are discussing, John Coltrane's seminal record Ascension later down the track, we'll discuss that in more detail because that's basically the final form of free jazz, at least in the 60s period. But what Beefheart does here, and I believe entirely intentionally, is to probe exactly what it is that we enjoy about using these conventional instruments with well-established musical purposes to create chaos. Why do we enjoy free jazz? Why do we enjoy the creation of chaos with things that are normally ordered? To work in service of subverting every established musical rule, to push towards the possibility of a new musical form, or at least a widening of the form of what rock and roll can be, or rock music can be, at this particular juncture in history. And I've already kind of pointed out as well, is that there is some precedent for this in terms of the similarly subversive stuff that bands like the Velvet Underground were doing to a lesser extent earlier than this album. And I, for one, like to imagine that band's eventual move away from the more experimental shades of their early releases was inspired by hearing this and realizing that Beefheart had beaten them to its logical conclusion. And there are, admittedly, like I said, there are even moments where the band does seem to lock into something that approaches a recognizable rhythm on songs like Pachuco Cadaver and Veterans Day Poppy, for example. And that does, in a lot of ways, seem like a cruel joke, but it also seems like an acknowledgement as well that this is all purposeful and that this is all being done with kind of a wink and a nod. And I guess I completely understand that only irritating people further, but I do think it's an important aspect of the personality of the album that will basically strengthen your opinion on it, whether you like it or whether you hate it. That all said, while I do feel there is clearly purpose, to the record's sprawling, overwhelming length in terms of absolutely beating the listener into submission. I do feel, just to nitpick, that it does outstay its welcome even for this purpose considerably. Specifically, by the time you get into the home stretch of the record, it does feel as though the arrangements and playing and the ideas behind them are very much just going through the motions, exercising chaos in a way that does feel a little less inspired by that point and a little more just filling time. It's not really a huge issue for me, since Beefheart does have the charisma and the energy to sustain pretty much every track here. But it gets to the point where I start to find, towards the end, I start to find the experience less fascinating and more punishing. And I just jibe generally with the fascinating meaning of the experience more so than the punishing aspect of it. And look, I fully concede that its punishing nature may very much be its point, but for me, it detracts from the effect, not because it's punishing, but because the way it goes about doing that induces fatigue more than anything else. I just get really fatigued with this record towards the end of it. Whereas in the first 40-50 minutes of it, I'm like, it's constantly demanding my attention in ways in which I'm always having to process something, and that's interesting. And then the effect of that becomes a little bit dull towards the end. But I guess maybe that is Beefheart's intention. Maybe he wants to break you, and clearly he's succeeded with a lot of people. And I still am going to check out his later work. I've heard really, really good things about albums like Mirror Man and Lick My Decals Off, Baby. But I will
Pardon
say...
me?
That's one of his records. That is what it's
How
called.
fucking dare you say that to me?
But yeah, I will say that this is...
Please take me to dinner first.
It's a weird, untamed, arrogant little shit of a record that is has infected me, and I can't get it out of my system. I don't know really properly how I exactly feel about it, except for the fact that it is, like it or not, a part of me now, and I do come back to it as time passes. Very rarely, not regularly at all. Like, I would say less than once every 2 years. But when I do, I feel like I hear different things in it in a way which is valuable to me, and in a way which at least makes me curious and makes me appreciative of its existence. And I can't justify at all any of the horrific means that were utilized in the creation of the record. But in terms of evaluating it for what it does and for what it has done, for me, the fact that a lot of the subgenres and alternative variations of music that I really, really enjoy, like a lot of punk-related stuff, would not exist in the form that it does without this record. That knowing that ties me to it in a way which I would not choose to be tied to it for that reason, but it just does. I have to give it my begrudging respect, and I have to say that I do find listening to it and knowing it a rewarding, if difficult, experience.
Are you familiar with the concept of Stockholm Syndrome?
Yeah, you know what? I'm not even going to deny that could be an element of it. Like, it's very much that, you have this guy in your head for 80 minutes, and after a certain point, you can't keep fighting.
I mean, like, seriously, Tyler, like, in all my sincerity, I'm just concerned for you as a friend. I just want to give you a big hug and tell you everything's going to be okay, and tell you how much I love you and appreciate your friendship, and how you don't have to listen to Captain Beefheart. He can't hurt you anymore. You can listen to things like Autechre, and it can push on your dopamine buttons.
Dead.
And release all the good chemicals, and it'll be great. It'll be so nice.
The thing is, though, this actually, it's not entirely a different experience to listening to, like, long form, late period Autechre in a way. There are different distinctions in the sense that that's not music that tries to be a musical or that tries to be, you know, it is music that kind of rejects and fucks with conventional notions of what rhythm should be. So they're similar in that aspect. But look, I won't go down this rabbit hole because I know you're regretting already mentioning it.
Like an Autechre 8-hour live album. I would rather be forced to listen to that without sleeping 3 times in a row before listening to this album.
That would probably be a good record.
Again.
I mean, be careful what you wish for.
Ass eater equals too much rum.
Atrocity exhibition.
Autechre equals Trout Mask Replica.
How is Autechre abbreviated as AE? I'm drunk and that shit makes no fucking sense.
It's not 2 words.
That's always been their logo.
It always has been.
Well, then I'm gonna talk to them for a little while and tell them why I'm really wrong.
Okay. So before one of us passes out, let's wrap this up.
Yeah, let's do it. Should we do we dare do favorite tracks and ratings?
I don't see a point.
I don't really.
Number 1, 2, and 3. Chinese satellite. Least favorite Chinese satellite rating.
I see a point in ratings, but not in favorite tracks.
There is a stretch of this record that I think is consistently interesting, particularly which is the stretch from Alaguru to Pachuco Cadaver early in the record. I really like that stretch in particular.
You just spoke nonsense to me. Every word.
Anyway, I don't see a point in doing favorite tracks, but I'm happy to do ratings for this.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, let's just stick to our order then. Jake?
Well, I was going to give this a 2 out of 10 because it contained a modicum of my respect for challenging the art form. But after Morgan's story, and look, I'm not the type of person that can't separate the artist from the art. One of my favorite movies is Baby Driver, and everybody who made that movie except for Edgar Wright's a piece of shit, apparently. But now that I know that about it, I'm just like, well, all you had before was my respect, and you don't have that. So I'm going to give it a 1.5.
All right.
That's fair.
Cool.
Fair enough. I mean, you can like this album without... I think liking this album is completely independent from celebrating anything Captain Beefheart did or anything that he did as a person. So, 8. 8 out of 10.
Damn.
I like it a lot.
I think I can guess Morgan's rating, but I'm interested to hear
it. To put a cap on this whole thing, there are, as I have said, there are albums that I hate more than this, but there is not a single album that I want to fist fight more than this one. I would like to kick this album's ass. Which is 1 out of 10. Get never again.
That's okay. That's fair.
I know. 0. That's impressive.
Well, 0 is stupid.
Yeah, I was going to say 0. I don't think Morgan believes in 0s.
I thought it was going to be a 0.5, yeah.
But that's fine.
No, I mean,
let's not try and convince him to change his mind.
No, we saved that for late career Green Day.
Okay, Saoirse, your rating.
Swiftly along. Yeah, Saoirse, what is your rating?
I'm probably also going to give this an 8.
Cool. And just to be completely unoriginal, I had this already written down. My rating is 8 out of 10 also.
Wow. This is going to be a hell for that standard deviation thing.
3.7 is the standard deviation.
It's already one that beat 3.
I think it's funny Morgan said that he reserves the lowest score for late career Green Day, despite the fact that Captain Beefheart literally abused his bandmates. Billy Joel Armstrong just made music so fucking bad because he sucks so much.
There is a humor to that dichotomy.
There is.
Yeah, it's because Green Day sucks the golf ball through a garden hose.
So Father of All would be a better album if you could hear Billy Joe Armstrong throwing a cymbal at whatever the fucking drummer's name is.
I hate that you're not wrong.
Trey Cool.
Is that? No, that's not his name. No.
I mean,
it's his name.
Not legally.
What is his stage name?
No, but
Say
he
that
doesn't
again?
go by that, does he?
Oh yeah.
His stage name is Trey Cool.
Oh God,
Fuck
that's
off.
almost as bad as The Edge.
I would throw a cymbal at his head if I could.
Okay, so
Imagine
next
being
week,
like, "Hello, everyone. I'm the Edge."
I hate you
Hi
two so
everyone,
much.
I'm
Fuck you two.
Bono.
there is literally a movie called Killing Bono about the origins of Bono. About the origins of U2.
God,
Does
if
it
it was about
feature-
anything
Does it
else,
feature
like
a
actually
scene
about
in
killing
which
Bono, I'd
Bono
watch
is
it.
killed?
No, but
not
that
watching
would.
it does
that would've
feature the scene in
saved
which
it.
they come up with their nicknames.
Oh God.
I imagine it being like the end of the Josh Trank Fantastic Four movie, where he's
What are we,
just
some
like,
kind of
we should
Fantastic
call
Four?
ourselves.
You know
and then
what
it cuts to black.
you know what my favorite
Are we some kind of U2?
my favorite shitty thing to say about U2 is the fact that they call one of their albums "How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb," which I think says everything you need to know about late career U2.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
How do we fix
lads,
this?
next week we're talking about the widely lauded new record by the Microphones. Microphones
are
inside
we?
of 2020.
Yeah,
Is that
yeah.
next
we've
week?
that up.
And
Actual
we're
we did.
also talking
I
about
was unaware.
the new record by the Lawrence Arms, Skeleton Coast.
And
And it is
our next record club record is going to
Is
be
recommended by Tyler.
Is my recommendation. I toiled and tormented and struggled with which Ortega album to choose for this
relatable
podcast.
struggles.
I literally still am not happy with my choice, but like I would be unhappy if I changed it as well. So we're going to be reviewing LP5. That's also known as the self-titled Ortega album, which is their 5th record. Funnily enough, it'd be funny if it wasn't.
Black album.
Cool. Yeah. Anyway, another cool fact about Ortega album titles is that a lot of them refer to the number that the album is in their discography, like XI,
Yes.
which is a reference to the
11.
Roman numeral XI,
Yeah.
their 11th album. Anyway, and also Draft 7.30, which is their 7th album. Anyway,
there we go.
so
There
yeah.
we go.
So,
you can
Cool,
tell
he
I'm already
can't
going
read
to
the same
fanboy.
thing.
So we're going to review that album next week. It's not my favorite Ortega album by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think it is an interesting one to talk about. I'll get into why that is. And yeah, so see you then. Please join us. And before you go, comment section. What do you think about Trout Mask Replica? Please let us know. Which side of the fence do you fall on, or are you a fence-sitting
And if you
coward?
like it, please leave your name, address, and social security number for entirely unrelated reasons.
Yes. And would you throw a symbol
your
at
security
Bono's
code on
head?
your credit card, and the 16-digit number on the front, and the expiry date?
Tell me
Alright,
tell me
everyone.
how I just didn't get your shitty, stupid favorite album. Go ahead, tell me how I just didn't get it.
Yes.
All right,
please do.
everyone.
Please
Morgan.
tell
And
me
on
It's
that
time,
note,
folks.
Then Morgan will come
rock
to your
over
house
London.
and kill your
Rock
parents
on
with a
Rock on
shotgun.
Chicago.
Eminem.